I'm going to introduce our next speakers. If folks, if a production team, you want to bring them in, they're two staff attorneys for the American Civil Liberties Union chapter in the state of Florida. And I always love hearing from ACLU folks because you are on the front lines. And so it's a pleasure and an honor for me to transition and turn it over to you two, and then maybe ask a couple questions. I'm David Domke. I'm part of the hosting team here with Common Power, and I'm not sure which one of you is who, but we're joined here by, if I get the names right, Maite Garcia and Jackie Azis. I'm hoping like I'm close, okay? But you can correct me, of course, please do. And let's just start with you two, if you don't mind, telling us about exactly how your work is directly on point with this assault on truth and democracy. And then I might kind of come back in and just ask a couple questions too. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here and just are so inspired to see so many people involved in this amazing effort. My name is Maite Garcia, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jackie Azis. And Jackie will talk a little bit about our work right now on education censorship.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. This is so inspiring to hear from so many individuals who are working so hard and so many activists within Florida and everywhere. I'm a staff attorney with the ACLU of Florida. I'm working on a lawsuit with many other organizations and many other attorneys that is attacking the Stop Woke Act, which you've heard a lot about throughout this program. Our lawsuit, I just want to go through maybe a timeline of it and tell you a little bit about it. So we have joined up with so I'm part of ACLU of Florida. We've joined up with ACLU National, the Legal Defense Fund, as well as the law firm Ballard Spahr, and we have sued we have many defendants, but essentially we have sued to enjoin. We have sued to make sure that the Stop Woke Act cannot be enforced within higher education in Florida. And right now it is enjoined, which means there is a preliminary injunction in place. And I want people to understand what that means. And that means within Florida, within higher education and public institutions, that the Stop Woke Act cannot be enforced right now. And that is because we have a preliminary injunction in place. That is being appealed, of course, by the defendants to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one step below the Supreme Court of the United States. But that appeal is pending. And so as of now, the Stop Woke Act is enjoined. It cannot be enforced in higher education in Florida. I want to give a little bit of history about the Stop Woke Act. So in December 2021, that's when Governor DeSantis made the statement that he's going to propose a bill as a way to, quote, fight back against woke indoctrination. In the 2022 legislative session, the legislators decided to take this bill and run with it. And they passed what is called the Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act, also known as the Stop Woke Act. Now, another name they gave it, curiously, is called the Individual Freedom Act, when really what this bill does is anything but freedom, right? It stifles speech and it makes it so people can't talk and learn and educate about certain topics that are important. In April of 2022, then the governor signed the bill. And in August 2022, we filed the lawsuit along with the other organizations I mentioned. There are 7 professors and 1 student. The defendants in the case include many of the universities within Florida, the well-known universities you all have heard about. So after we filed the lawsuit, immediately after, we also filed what's called a motion for preliminary injunction, which is essentially telling the court what this case deals with is so important that we need the court to make a ruling before we even get a chance to go to trial, because it deals with very important issues, including the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And the court granted that motion for preliminary injunction mostly in November. And then, of course, the defendants appealed that in November of 2022, and it remains pending. We are preparing to both deal with the appeal, but also at the same time working to prepare for trial, which is scheduled for July of next year. So this is a long process, but again, the big takeaway is right now, the Stop Woke Act cannot be enforced in higher education. So it applies to public colleges and universities. It is essentially prohibits training, and it prohibits instruction on certain topics. So let's talk about those 8 prohibited concepts. They're very vaguely worded, and this is on purpose, right? Because the idea for the legislator and the governor is, let's make this so vague, people don't really know what's allowed and what's not allowed. And in that way, people will just be afraid to talk about these concepts at all in any way. And it is doing that in many instances, even though it's enjoined. And we want you to please share that. It cannot be enforced right now in higher education. Please share that information. People are just scared. And so this bill is doing what it was built to do, which is stifle speech about certain topics. Now, what are those topics? One of those, again, there are 8 concepts. One of those is that members of one race, color, national origin, or sex are morally superior to members of another race, color, or national origin, or sex. Another concept is a person by virtue of their race, color, national origin, or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. I want to take a minute to talk about that because you've probably heard a lot about unconscious bias trainings. This is making it so people cannot instruct or teach about that, or that's at least what the bill was attempting to do before we got the preliminary injunction granted. You also cannot talk about how a person's moral character or status is either privileged or oppressed is determined by his or her race, color, national origin, or sex. And you can't talk about how any of those, race, color, national origin, or sex, you cannot and should not attempt to treat others with respect to their race, national origin, or sex. So the 5th concept talks about how a person by virtue of their race, color, national origin, or sex bears responsibility for or should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment because of actions committed in the past by other members of their same demographics. And also it talks about a person by virtue of his or her race, color, national origin, or sex should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll note that in the preliminary injunction order that the judge granted as to concept 6, the court pauses to offer an example of what this means, and it talks about how basically it's about affirmative action and how the concept of affirmative action should not be taught or even discussed. And then the final 2, and sorry, I'm running through them, but these are the 8 prohibited concepts, and you can see how the wording is so vague that it just really stifles speech because people are hesitant to even try to talk about these topics. Talks about that no person has played no part in hurting other members of race, color, national origin. And then finally, that merit, excellence, hard work, fairness, neutrality, objectivity, and racial colorblindness are racist or sexist, or were created by members of a particular race, national origin, sex. Anyways, that was a lot of legal words. All of that to say, those are the 8 concepts that have been prohibited. And as you can tell, it is too vague for people to want to even touch those topics. So where are we now? We have the order granting the preliminary injunction that was issued in November, and it still remains in place. The appeal in front of the 11th Circuit is ongoing. There is briefing being done, and then we expect there will be oral arguments. We do not have a date for that yet. And then, as I mentioned, there will be a trial set, and that is set for July of next year. So what is the big takeaway here for all of you? And I've said it before, but it bears repeating and sharing with your networks. The preliminary injunction against the Stop Woke Act remains in place for public institutions of higher education. And the defendants in that case must take no steps to enforce the Stop Woke Act. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here to talk more about, again, that what I just discussed was regarding public institutions of higher education. And my colleague is going to discuss what's going on with our K-12 investigation.
Thanks, Jackie. So one of the questions that I think we get is, where are we as it pertains to the Stop Woke Act in K-12 education? So in K-12, the law surrounding First Amendment is a little bit different because basically the case law talks about how the state has an interest in curriculum. So the First Amendment applies a little bit differently. That said, I can share with you all that we are actively investigating a K-12 claim. And I want to talk a little bit about also what you all can do in the community, as well as how you stay in touch with us. We are here to do what is most helpful to the community. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear if you know people that have been impacted, if you yourself have been impacted, if you know students, parents, teachers, administrators that have been impacted. And I'm going to go ahead and provide you some of the tools to do that. So first, obviously, ACLU Florida welcomes any donations. You can become a member. We are also hiring for numerous positions. So take a look and see if any of those fit your skill set. Stay in touch with us. You can sign up for emails on our website. We also have a national podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of the socials. And we frequently post updates about our cases and other ongoings in Florida on those platforms. And then we also have a YouTube channel. Stay informed. Like I said, we post updates. So if you want to follow our case page, anytime that there's decisions made or anything substantive happening in those cases, we provide updates on the website. We've also, send out press releases and post those on the website. So you can definitely check out our page to get the latest on the Purnell case and any subsequent decisions that we make regarding other filings. As you've heard today, there's a lot going on in Florida related to education censorship. It's not just Stop Woke. And they're all sort of intertwined and meeting in a really diabolical way. So we're following all of that and are interested, of course, in hearing about that. And we'll be posting about that as things develop. Other things that you can do, speak about education censorship at your school, let us know the responses. So this is really targeted more towards local folks, so folks that are listening in from Florida. We're very interested to hear what the responses have been when folks choose to speak up against this. Also, file public records requests at your school. A lot of the things, as Jackie pointed out, have been very purposely vague. And what we're hearing on the ground is that people are, even at the administration level or the school board level, not wanting to necessarily put things in writing or put policies surrounding this in a way that can be documented. So it's important, I think, to ask questions about when something is when a particular teaching or book is being challenged in your schools, what the basis for that is, because I think what we're hearing is the law when, it really involves multiple laws. So any clarity that folks can get on the ground as to what administrators are using to censor and stifle speech is very helpful to us. Likewise, you can speak up at school board meetings on these issues. You can serve as a point of contact in your school area, catalog complaints and share them with us so we can identify, moments of censorship and where it's being enforced and how. And last but not least, it would not be a call to action if I didn't say you have to vote. So register to vote. Here in Florida, elsewhere, vote often and vote always, basically. So yeah, I'm going to share, we also have a QR code, and I'm going to go ahead and pass that along to the organizers as well so that folks can access it after the fact. But here is the address to our intake form. Please contact us to discuss your experiences. We want to hear from you all about what's going on the ground, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what's going on in your communities in Florida. Folks from out of state, everyone knows someone, in their field and other places. So if you have friends in Florida, check in on them, see how they're doing. Tell them about this presentation, tell them about what the ACLU, Florida ACLU National and the Legal Defense Fund are up to, and point them in the direction of these resources if they are seeing things in their schools so that they can get into contact with us. And I think that is it from us.
I was hoping I could just take a moment to talk just briefly more about our litigation, because I think I have to mention that the Stop Woke Act was explicitly in response to the protests that happened in 2020 as a result of the murder of George Floyd and others by law enforcement. And this was an attempt by the legislator and our governor for people to not be able to talk about these issues anymore, when it was very apparent that people want to talk about these issues and learn about them and need to talk about them and discuss them. And so we are very, very thankful for our plaintiffs who are our clients who were so willing to step up and challenge this law. And so I do want to just briefly mention who they are, because we could not do this without our clients. It takes a lot of courage to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit like this. So let me just briefly mention who those are. And many of you watching may know these individuals. First, we have a professor, Dr. Leroy Purnell. He is a Black man. He's a professor of law at FAMU Law. He teaches criminal procedure towards juvenile constitutional law and race in the law. So you can see how he would, be very much impacted by this law. Next, we have Professor Dr. Dana Dorsey. She's a Black woman professor of educational leadership and policy studies at the University of South Florida, who teaches school law and critical race studies. We have Professor Dr. Sharon Austin, a Black woman and tenured professor of political science at the University of Florida, who teaches African-American politics, minority politics, American government, public law, and public policy. Then Professor Dr. Shelley Park. She is a white woman and tenured professor of philosophy and cultural studies at the University of Central Florida. And she is faculty in the Women and Gender Studies program. She teaches feminist theories, theories of sex and gender and humanities, race and technology, and intro to philosophy. And you can see as I'm listing these courses that these individuals teach, how can you even teach these courses without talking about the topics that the Stop Woke Act prohibits? It's not possible. Professor Dr. Jennifer Sandoval, she's a Latino woman tenured at University of Central Florida in the School of Communications and Media. She teaches intercultural communications. Professor Russell Almond, he's a white man, professor of measurements and statistics in the Department of Educational Psychology at Florida State University, who teaches data analysis, and he uses a number of studies that explore race as a variable in social science studies. And I mention that because maybe when you hear what he teaches, you're like, well, how is that impacted by Stop Woke Act? And that just shows the breadth of this law. It impacts so many courses that we don't even maybe naturally think are impacted. Finally, Dr. Marvin Dunn, who's a professor at Florida International University. He has a Black History bus tour, which he continues to lead. Take that bus tour if you're in the Miami area. And we have one student, Johanna Dauphin, and she is a Black woman and senior at Florida State University, who's majoring in international affairs and urban and regional planning. These individuals, thank them for their willingness to be a part of this fight. It's a really long process. It's difficult for people to put themselves out there as a plaintiff in this type of case. And we couldn't do it without all of you and all the activists throughout the state and the country who are working to make sure that that bills like these and laws like these are challenged, to make sure they are challenged.
Jackie and Maite, this is Terry Ann Scott. First of all, thank you so much for being here and for giving us this presentation. If you don't mind sticking around with us for a few minutes, we're going to ask you a few questions, because I think what you brought here, and you just contacted me yesterday or the other day, and I was so thrilled that you did so that we could have this conversation. So before I get to a few questions I want to ask, we're bringing in Jordan Schulte. She works with us in the Institute for Common Power. She is one of our consultants and soon to be a fellow. So she has a question she'd like to ask you.
Hi, thank you. First off, thank you guys so much for being here and sharing all that you did. It's just, I didn't even know the depth of which the bill was attempting to silence individuals and educators specifically, and just hearing it worsens, the reality of it. I think it astonished me. I couldn't even believe some of the things that were written there. I have a couple quick questions. I know you mentioned that in higher education, it's currently on a pause, so to speak, that it can't be enforced. And then for K through 12, is that not the case? Is it able to be enforced for K through 12 educators? And then the other quick second question was, I know you mentioned it's going through the 11th Circuit, I think you mentioned. Do you believe that there will be a solution at that point? Or I know you said the next level then is the Supreme Court. Do you believe that this is something, hopefully not, but that will be able to be shot down before then? Or if that's something you guys are able to discuss. If not, I completely understand. But I just can't even believe that, it has even gotten to this point.
Yeah, so as to your first question about K through 12, stop work is able to be enforced in the K through 12 context. Though, as I shared, we are actively investigating claims and instances of harm, instances of enforcement. So we're very interested in, if you know someone, if you yourself have been impacted, please reach out to us via our intake form. And we can speak really in any capacity. We understand this is a scary time for teachers in Florida. So reach out to us and we'll be in touch.
And as to your second question, we are in front of the 11th Circuit, but we're there on just the preliminary injunction. And we think that it may not go to like the next level until we do go to trial, which is not scheduled until next year. So I'm not worried about anyone else right now and we're not worried about anyone else right now except the 11th Circuit and preparing for trial for next year. And then we'll start to think what happens next, if and when that happens.
But as Jackie said, what's crucial and just was a huge win on the part of everybody's efforts was making sure that the injunction stays in place while that decision is being made.
Okay.
Yeah.
Both of you, thank you. Yeah, Jordan, that was a great questions, and actually took the words right out of my mouth, which tells me you were thinking that. And I think a lot of people who are watching were thinking the exact same thing. So I'm very glad that you asked that. I want to begin where you all ended. So you ended with a call to action. As we've been doing this teaching since 6 p.m. yesterday, we've been cycling through the history now, the why now, and then the take action. So your call to action really chimes exceptionally well with one of our core missions here, and that is pushing people from education to action. So first of all, will you be able to, and I'm asking this for everybody who is out there, send us the links to every single thing that you showed and to the QR code so that we can share it with everyone?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Then the other thing is, when you contacted me the other day, we had this kind of back and forth of thanking each other. I said, we admire the ACLU. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And you said, we are so happy what you're doing. And we said, we can't do this without litigation. And you said, we need people to be educated to understand the importance of these situations. Can you expand on that for the people who are listening? If, for instance, Governor DeSantis, some of the legislators who are moving against this, those people who think what they are doing is a good thing, can you explain to us how important education, history is to the work that you are doing?
So I was definitely referring to, when we spoke, what we call integrated advocacy, because we believe at the ACLU of Florida that you cannot win every battle in a courtroom. It takes the community, it takes impacted people on the ground to really know what's going on and be informed and then act on it, through some of the ways that I discussed today, like speaking up at a school board meeting, like doing outreach with us because you recognize that, for example, that it's being enforced at a university, at a public university, reach out to us. We want to hear about that because it should not be, right? And then in the K through 12 context, really providing us with examples of how it's playing out so that we take the action that best impacts our community. We don't work in a vacuum. So that's what I would say. And in terms of education and history and people and how that's so important for the work, aside from just having to fight really hard against misinformation, that, as Jackie pointed out, the reaction to a lot of the misinformation and to the vagueness has been, well, I'm just not going to talk about it at all, right? So harmful to our communities and to students and their future leaders, future citizens, not understanding the historical context and the truth behind our history. So I think really that's where education and what you all are doing is so important. And then of course, for our part, doing these outreach efforts to make sure that people understand what's actually enjoined, what's in effect, what does the law mean, insofar as we can interpret some of the really vague language, and how is that playing out in everyone's community.
That's perfect. So a couple of things. You mentioned school boards. I, at times, feel like a broken record because I am constantly pushing the importance of school board elections. When people say, well, I don't vote, my vote doesn't matter, one of the ways to get people to understand how important their vote is, because Common Power, the parent organization to the Institute for Common Power, works in voting justice, knocking on doors, registering people to vote. One of the ways to get them to understand how important their vote is to say, first of all, if it wasn't important, there wouldn't be so much legislation advanced to suppress it. Number two, local elections are often won by a handful of votes. School boards are a primary example. If we are sitting here and talking about the importance of education, talking about efforts to erase truth from education, if you vote in your local school board election, if you get your neighbors to vote, the people who sit on that school board who have so much power to create change in your schools, whether you have children or not, just as an invested citizen, that could be determined by 5, 10, or 100 votes. So I want people to understand that. You said if they see something, say something. You said contact you. How do people contact you?
Through our intake form would probably be the best if you're specifically reporting harm or something that you're seeing in your community. And then we have social media and ways to be contacted that way. And then, of course, if you just want to know our ongoings, there's links that we're going to be providing to our website and to our social media pages that people can access.
Perfect. So 2 last things that I want to ask you. You've presented how you have a preliminary injunction to stop the enforcement of Stop Woke in higher education. I know we just had the recent bill passed that is ending DEI programming. I assume you guys are probably all over that. It gives me a large sense of comfort that you are out there fighting this fight. Number one, how can we help you fight this fight? And number two, how confident should we be that the higher courts will overturn this?
Great questions.
Yeah, they are really good questions.
You can help us, one, of course, spreading the word about the current state of the law, contacting your legislators whenever bills are passed that are like this, voting, as we talked about. Currently, we shared that QR code earlier, and we'll share it again with the team here, but please keep us informed if you see any, violations of the preliminary injunction, which is in place. We want to know about those. That's absolutely very much something, we're concerned about, but, we haven't heard anything yet. So keep us informed. In the K through 12 context, contact us if the Stop Woke has impacted you, your child's school, your teacher, an instructor, or other faculty member. Hopefully. And then to your second question, I think the law is on our side. I think, the First Amendment, if it means anything, it means the right for people to talk about things. It means the right for people to learn and to instruct, and especially in the higher education context. There would be no value in higher education if everyone's just sitting there discussing things that all of us can agree on and that there's no disagreement on, right? Part of the, I think, fun and, importance of going into college is to learn about different theories, different points of view, and that's what really makes higher education so important.
Great. Thank you very much for that. We have one more question. I think we're going to bring David Domke in for a moment to ask you one more question. How quickly are we able to do that? Okay, in the interim, I just want to say thank you very much. Oh, here we are. All right, go ahead.
I just would like to ask you, what is the penalty for being convicted under this, let's just go with the K-12 law, which is in place. So what is the baseline penalty for a teacher if they are charged and convicted under the law?
I was just gonna say, so it's not like a criminal law where like jail or something.
Though there are other censorship laws that do actually carry criminal penalties, and I'm not remembering the bill number off the top of my head right now, but in terms of consequences, what I think we'll see as it starts to play out in our curriculum and teachers, take a stand and continue to teach the way and truth the way that they have in the past, is that I think their license and their livelihood is likely to be jeopardized or could be jeopardized. And in terms of enforcement, we're seeing just a really wide range of things. There's been a lot more enforcement, I would say, on the book bans than on curriculum thus far, but we do believe that part of that is due to this vagueness and frankly, self-censorship. You know, a lot of the folks on the ground we're talking to are just saying, I'm avoiding these topics altogether out of fear, you know, of retaliation.
That seems to be the saddest part of all of this.
Yeah. So a teacher who would decide to somehow challenge this is risking getting fired from their job, but also being ousted from the profession.
Yes, absolutely. And we are, to be clear, as we ask you to contact us and all that, very aware of the risks and are just very, very grateful for people who have chosen to speak out and to speak to us about, you know, their experiences. Because, you know, Terry, you asked, like, what can you do to help? That is one of the things, right? We can't bring a lawsuit. I can't bring a lawsuit on behalf of myself, as appalled as I may be. You know, we need to bring it on behalf of people impacted.